Hi Tim, how you doing?
I'm good, Shabbar. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. I'm really looking forward to building on the conversation we had in the last episode, which was we identified this problem of money, not the problem with money, but the problem of money, which is really
Mm.
fascinating. And I think it'd be good to just quickly start with the quote that
hmm
we dived into and started unpacking a little bit by a chap who I hadn't heard of, but Jacob Needleman. Do you want to quickly recap the quote
Yeah,
that we spoke about last week?
sure. So yeah, it's Jacob Needleman who wrote. I think he's a philosophy professor. I should find out exactly where. He wrote one of many books, but he wrote a book called Money and the Meaning of Life, which is really interesting. And this is something he says. This quote's from page 2. He says, "The problem of money dogs our steps throughout the whole of our lives, exerting a pressure that in its way is as powerful and insistent as any other problem of human existence. And it haunts the spiritual search as well." And then I added on to that last week. It's a few pages later in the book. He says this: "Without a long work on oneself, it's impossible in contemporary conditions to be generous and free in regard to the force of money," which I love. So yeah, last week we talked a bit, didn't we, about the problem of money. And as you said, it's not the problem with money. We're not making money bad, but somehow money, most humans I've ever met experience it as a problem in some way. And then this idea of the force of money. There's something about money that pushes us or drives us or blocks us, or so that's what we started exploring last week. And I guess we'll carry on this week.
Yeah, absolutely. That idea of an invisible force.
Mm.
It's almost like Star Wars, like the force is around you, and it can act on you in different ways. And one of the things that we highlighted last week was this idea of freedom, and we talked a bit about this idea of not being free in one's life. And what struck me was that it really applies at either end of the spectrum. There isn't this is a little money problem with freedom or a lot of money. It ranges. So wherever you sit on the spectrum, you're rubbing up against this lack of feeling free. And so I think today it would be good to explore in what ways does
Mm.
this show up in people's lives? Because I think that would be an interesting direction to go down. So if you've got anything to say about the different
Mm.
ways that this
Mm.
potentially shows up, or how people get caught up in this sort of whirlwind of the problem of money
Mm.
and the lack of feeling free.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's build on what you already said. I think that's a really important recap because it's important because it's so different to how we normally think. So first, as you said, we're talking about the problem of money, not the problem with money. And we talked about this a lot last time, the obvious easy step most of us would make is that, well, yeah, if I have loads of money, there's no problem. And if I don't have money, there's a problem. And so last time we talked a lot about, yeah, it's deeper than that. There's plenty of millionaires and billionaires and people who've inherited and, who have loads of money, but they still don't feel free in their lives. They feel weighed down. They feel responsible. They feel disconnected, somehow to them wrapped up with the money. Sure, they can have nice hotels. Sure, they've got food on their table and they heat their houses. And no one's pretending that's not a great privilege, but it's also true they still don't feel that sense of flow or freedom. We both know that's absolutely true. People who have money sometimes, not all of them, it can feel like a tremendous weight, a tremendous constraint, tremendous source of worry and anxiety, which sounds counterintuitive, but I think it's worth repeating, right? And then, of course, other people, they're really struggling for money, struggling to pay bills. And that, of course, creates its own pressure. And they're very anxious and very worried and can be really, really hard and stressful. So then also, if I'm struggling that way, I can also be convinced, well, I'm not free. I can't make changes in my life. I couldn't follow what I really like. Of course, mate, because I've got to put food on the table. So the freedom we're talking about, I think this is important before we break it down. Freedom's one word, and there are many, many words about it, actually, and different psychological, spiritual, different systems have different words. But the fundamental question is, if there was no obstacle, or if money wasn't an issue, or if there was no fear or whatever, where would my life really like to flow? If I can be in touch with that deeper part of me, my heart, my soul, my gut, my longing. And if I could be, just free for just to really tune into that, what's the step in my life that I'd love to do? It might be a work related or a project related, or I just love to, be able to rest more or connect with nature or create things. So I think the freedom in the quote, it's really worth thinking. It's a deep way of being. It's a deep possibility of how we can be. So that's why I think this quote, when he says, it's as powerful and insistent as any other problem of human existence. How can we really be free to do what is ours to do or follow our path, etc. Okay, so that's a bit of a recap. But the reason I think it's important, and you and I, we may be going to have to recap this a few times, because it's so different from what we normally think about money, which is, if I have money, I can do what the hell I like. That's great. And if I don't, I can't. And I think what we're suggesting is we want a deeper conversation. So I hope that's all right. I've done a bit of a recap. So now you're asking me, okay, can you break down the different ways in which somehow people don't feel free to do or follow what's theirs, or the different ways in which this force of money seems to act on us? And normally we don't know or don't notice, or we just think that's how it has to be. So it's a great question. And I'm sure you've seen examples, with your own clients. I think for today, maybe let's talk about the two main ways that can crop up. Yeah. And then maybe in other episodes, we can break it down further and further. Because what I always say is each person is unique, right? According to your situation, your personality, your upbringing, your culture. There are as many ways of not really being free to follow our life, or being in some way entangled with the problem of money. It's unique for all of us. I always say people have their own unique money dance. So on one level, it's infinite, but there are core patterns that people do. So maybe today we talk about core patterns. So let's start with the most obvious one. Again, I think the one that's most obvious. To the extent that I think or believe, and this goes quite deep, but let's say I really do believe, if I have money, that I just get to do what I want. Look at all those billionaires. They feel happy, they feel free, they feel creative, they feel powerful. So let's say, like most of the culture, and because I've been educated this way and socialized this way, I just kind of have this view that the more money I have, the better life's going to be for me. Yeah. Then, well, let me ask you a question. What am I going to try and focus on in my money behavior? What's going to be my relationship to money?
I think it's primarily going to be one of pursuit.
Yeah.
Which I think, and I'm just quite interested to know whether is this a universal, so across all societies, cultures, demographics, or is this quite what I'm going to call a Western sort of capitalist mentality? I haven't looked into it too much, but we live in an inherently materialistic world. And so I'm just wondering whether in the ancient days gone by, it was the same dynamic. Not to digress, but I know that we're talking very general here, and I always have the tendency to go off onto these tangents of looking at things. But yeah, the pursuit. But I almost think, like, is the pursuit just a modern day Western problem?
So it's a great question, and definitely we should go into this in a future conversation. But I think first we need to get the basic patterns, which we'll do today. Then we need to go a bit deeper into them. Okay. And then when we've got more into it, then the question is this for all humans, or could there be different cultures, or is this just modern capitalism? I think would be great questions, but we won't run before we can walk.
So let's just go back. So so to answer your question, right, the pursuit, it's the pursuit.
So a quick answer to your really great and complex question, I would say, is this: any culture that largely runs on a belief and a story, and it kind of socializes people on a deep level to assume, without really thinking about it that much, or assume without really checking it out in their lived experience. Any culture that has the story, with money come all the good things, which ours pretty much does, then you're going to set up a culture where people are unconsciously trying to grab, pursue, hold on to money. Because I believe that with this thing we call money comes everything that's good. So a quick answer is, have there been other cultures, now existing outside of global capitalism or in the that don't think with money comes everything I want? Sure, there have been. And then those cultures, we might pursue other things. We can get into all of that another time. But I think it's true, and again, if you look at, in my view, a very superficial kind of mass media we have, we worship billionaires and they seem to get into presidential palaces and they seem to be able to run things and do things and not be trapped by the conventions or the laws that most of us feel trapped by. And we have celebrities and Hollywood A-listers. And again, on a superficial level, it would be so easy to think, yeah, the people with money get to be beautiful and healthy and do what they like and have power and access. And they do. It doesn't mean many of them don't have terrible problems and are desperately unhappy and don't live rich lives and don't have any sense of meaning and live a actually very empty, meaningless life. And that's why there are so many very well-paid therapists, right? And so if I believe that and don't investigate it, then the main way I won't feel free to follow my life is I will feel I need to do whatever I can to increase this number, this money number, so that when I look at my bank account, I look at my computer screen to see my savings or my pension, or I'm driven, and I'm suggesting unconsciously, because I don't think this is true, but it feels true, I'm driven to get that number bigger or big enough. And you'll know with your clients, big enough might mean different things for different people. And then I might be aiming for a number that I think is big enough, and then somehow when I have it, I don't feel it's quite enough. And the point is, someone listening to this might say, well, Tim, this is crazy. Of course you need savings. Of course you need pensions. Yeah, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that if I tie up all the things I really want in life, I want to feel free, I want to feel creative, I want to feel powerful, like I can say what I like or do what I like, and I don't feel those things, if I tangle it up with a number, then if I'm not careful, I will live my whole life making decisions to try and make the number bigger, but I may not feel any more powerful or free or creative or happy or rich. So that can trap me in all sorts of ways.
I just was just thinking, how many wealthy people, for example, feel constrained on what they can and can't say based on the fact that it could materially affect the number.
Sure. So if we just take that as an example, I feel constrained on what I can and can't say. Many people, maybe they're doing a job and their numbers look, in conventional terms, quite good, but they don't really want to be doing that job. There's a lot of people like that, right? Then they feel constrained. They believe themselves to be very constrained. I can't leave now because, what if we run out of money, or what if this happened, or what if that happened? Now, remember, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a finance person. And this isn't about being stupid about money or saying money's bad. But if you look at that situation, I'm scared of saying what I want because I think it would maybe jeopardize my income. Or I'm scared of making a move, doing something that I really want to do or would be more meaningful because I'm worried about money. You strip it away, what we're actually communicating and experiencing in that moment is, I am afraid. That's what's happening. There's something I would love to do or long to do, or that would be more authentic for me, and I'm not going to do it because I'm scared. And this is about really looking at the experience, not just some cultural beliefs. Insofar as right now I'm an adult, grown-up man, and I'm not doing the thing I really believe in or want to, or speaking out because I'm scared, and I'm saying that's because of this thing called money, but really I'm not in touch with my fear, then that's not powerful. That's not creative. That's not free. So psychologically, all those parts of me that feel scared and don't feel powerful, for example, are constraining me, but I'm telling everybody and telling myself it's because of money.
Makes sense.
So we've gone quite far, but those are common examples. I don't speak out. I don't say what I don't believe. I'm not myself at work. I don't change something I really believe I should change because I'm afraid. It's not really to do with money.
And obviously not being true to oneself, I mean, that could be seen as detrimental to wellness and happiness and well-being. But this state of always, so we're looking at this state of the person who's in pursuit. Are there any other, so on one hand you've got the to be authentic, true, etc. Any other sort of spin-offs from that which you've encountered? So, you know, people that are constantly in pursuit mode, what are the other pitfalls with that?
Okay, yeah, it's a great question. And again, there's as many versions of this as there are people, but let's break it down, and then we'll look at the other side. It's almost like this is an umbrella or a sort of a chart with the problem of money and then two main ways of doing the problem with money, and then there are subsets, and maybe over our conversations we'll really get into them. So one thing is I pursue money, right? And I pursue money not because I love what I do or the pursuit for me is inherently meaningful, but I believe as my number goes up, I get to feel powerful, or I get to feel free, or I get to feel creative, or I get to feel successful. But we've said, what we're really saying if we're driven in that way is, I don't feel any of those things and I want to, so I chase the number. And it doesn't really deliver, right? That's why there are so many constrained, unhappy, rich people. So if we break that down, well, one thing, I might pursue money, right? That's obvious. I might not change things if I think that they'll bring my money number down. So lots of people stuck in jobs that pay well that they don't want to do, and they're just kind of yearning for the moment they believe they can stop doing the job, right? They're yearning for that moment they think they'll have enough to be free, but often it never comes. But another thing, well, okay, let's say I've got money, right? I've got money now. I want more, so I'll be pursuing it. But what else? What will I tend to do with the money that I've got? Again, if I'm tying up this feeling of power and freedom and creativity with the number, what will I do with my money, my savings?
You're going to guard it pretty tightly. So,
right.
And as an extension of that, I'm saying, you know, I'm going to use the word hoarding, but so that's quite strong. But you're going to be you're going to be quite vigilant.
Yeah, there's an anxiety there. Again, I don't want my number to go down because I have some anxiety I'm experiencing now, or I have a belief that the bigger the number, the more happy, powerful, successful I'll be. But it may not be true if I check my actual experience. So sure, I might pursue money or stay in a job I don't, or choose a job that pays rather than one I love, or many things like that. But with the money, yeah, I mean, hoarding would be a strong example. I may find it genuinely difficult to use the money I've got or spend it in ways that really bring me genuinely a feeling of being alive. What would be an example? I might, you know, pay for my well-earned annual holiday, but be so stressed trying to get the best deal in booking it, or so stressed about my budget when I'm on it, because I don't like my number to go down, because somehow unconsciously I think I lose power or freedom or something, that, you know, it's kind of like I don't really get to use my money in a way that actually brings me joy. That would be an example. So I don't spend it, or I spend it but I kind of feel a tension or an anxiety around it, or I spend it but I'm always a little bit penny pinching.
Playing small.
Yeah. Another big example of this would be, you know, maybe I've got savings, some, you know, not everyone has, and we'll talk about the other side for sure, but maybe I've got savings and actually I really could take a year or two off work and invest in retraining, or I really could do a sabbatical, or I really could leave a job I hate, and, you know, maybe I have got a cushion and I can find something better, but I probably won't do it, because even though it's the right move at a deeper level, my heart and soul would love me to make that move, I don't want that number to go down. So people like that often find it quite hard to invest in themselves or use their money for things that really bring them joy. So that's another way. Again, we're not saying that's the problem with money, and we're also not saying this is absolutely reality, but it will feel like reality. It's like, well, I know I've got these savings and I know I want to retrain as something, but I can't. It would be crazy. And so again, I don't get to feel free in relation to money.
And I think there's a societal pressure as well that, oh, this would be deemed to be like, what the hell are you doing? Like almost irresponsible to give up a lucrative career to follow something that you might be passionate about, or whatever could bring you more joy or happiness. But there's this sort of expectation of how how you do money,
Well,
and that you should always be pursuing more.
what will happen when you're older,
Yeah,
or your future?
exactly. And to take a step back again, so much is tied up in that, around, like, some of the things we said, like, power, freedom, etc., etc. It's almost flipped on its head that if you did do that, you would be seen as somehow a bit foolish, potentially.
Well, it's really interesting, and I think that's a good example of where, anyone listening to this, there's a difference between our fears and even other people's fears and the actual experience. Because I think you're right, in many areas of society, not all, as you've pointed out, but often we get messages, from our nearest and dearest, from people who love us, from our friends, from our peers, and we say, well, I'm thinking I might do this because you only live once, and I have got some money, and I really hate what I'm doing. And often this voice of caution or responsibility will come. Now, I think we get into this more in another episode, because I think the judgments of others are important. But in a way, it's not surprising, because if in general your peer group are all operating on this anxiety that if the number goes down, terrible things will happen, and therefore you shouldn't do what you really want in life, then you'll get that reflected back, right? But the question I'd offer you is, I think you're right. People do go, oh, are you crazy? But can you think of anyone you know in your life or have heard of who did take a deep breath and did leave something and go for something they really love to do, for a few months or a year or for the rest of their life? Can you think of that?
I did, but I think it was an external shock to the system that caused it. So I don't know whether it came from within voluntarily. So are we talking about voluntarily did it, or the fact that, because I know someone who was in a certain career, but then a health scare came along, in hospital, young chap, and then pursued something which was far more creative.
Interesting.
And now he's thriving doing that.
Beautiful.
But I think it would have never have happened. Well, it would have been unlikely, because he would have stayed on that career progression.
Yeah.
But now he's doing videography and film. If he ever listens to this, which I hope he does one day, I'm not going to mention his name, but
Sure.
I believe he was he was part of our community. He was in recruitment, quite stressed. Recruitment is a sales driven, sort of career, and had a very serious health scare, ended up in hospital. And then after that, he decided that he wanted to do something that he was really passionate and he really loved, and it was making film. And he's actually also, he's built a career on that in terms of helping people create, videos and social media and all of that creative stuff. And whenever you meet him, he's just he's just,
well, that's great,
exudes happiness. So
yeah.
So, but I don't think that was. I don't think that was. I think that was manufactured in a way because of the event. I don't know how many people are brave enough to just. I don't know.
The answer is people do.
I don't know any.
But yours is a great example. So let's break that down, because there's, again, a number of important things you said, some of which we might do a whole episode on. The first thing is, it was a major shock or disruption to his life, in this case, a health scare. You're right. Very often this pattern and the inertia of staying in, something that isn't what we really want, but we're scared. And in this case, all that gets tied up with a number. People spend their whole lives doing that, don't they? Or their decades. But sure, if you nearly die or have a severe health check, it really does make you think about, well, life is fragile. You know, you save for your pension, but there's no guarantee you get there, right? And if you do get there, if you spent 3 or 4 decades not doing what you want and disconnecting from your passion and not feeling free, who's to say suddenly you feel free and connected to your passion? So a health scare can do it. So that's important. Maybe we look at big shocks in life as opposed to just taking a deep breath and doing it in a future episode. But the other thing is, you said now you meet him, he's just exuding happiness. And even more important, when you talk about him, how do you feel?
Yeah, I feel generally it's infectious.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So again, there's often a difference. And I'd encourage people listening to this. It's not like I'm trying to persuade anyone. I'm really trying to invite people to actually notice their experience, what things actually feel like as they move through life and meet different people, not just have some new dogma because 2 blokes on a podcast were chatting about it. So, but it's important to notice, yes, so someone says, I might make this change, and then there might be this frisson of fear from their peers and a whole load of worry and anxiety. But then actually, very often, can't say always, but very often when they do it, there's a feeling of it's thrilling, it's exciting, they really feel alive, even if there are challenges or money challenges, they actually feel, wow, I'm actually connected with life, I'm actually doing what I'm here to do. And very often, because that is infectious and it is exciting, very often those people end up being, quite successful. I don't mean they become billionaires, they get to carry on doing what they want to do, because when you meet them, they're vital and they've got energy and they're uplifted and they're not as bored and weary as the rest of us. So it's good to notice with these judgments about, oh, you're crazy, etc., the difference between the judgment, which is really a kind of fear and a projection into the future. What if it goes wrong? What if this? What if that? And the actual experience of people who do that, who, as I say, they may have challenges. We all have challenges, but often there's a real energy there. So now I'm wondering about our time. There was the other side of this, and I'm thinking for today, because we've gone into some detail with the first pattern, maybe I just name the second pattern.
Yeah.
And we do that next week, and maybe I'll just name it to balance it. But before I do, anything else you're thinking about this first pattern, about the pursuit of money, or not wanting to let go of my money, or not wanting to use my money to forward my life? Any thoughts or questions around that?
Not really, because it makes sense, but on an intellectual level, it still feels that this would be an old. I mean, it's almost like I'm almost thinking like how do you unplug from the matrix? It's just the convention, right? And going against the grain is really difficult. So those are some of my thoughts, are simply around that this is, of course, I think we know with all of this work, and in our easier said than done, right? I think that's that's always the case, and the external shocks are always a very good conduit to making these things happen. But it almost feels like, even for me, it's like if I was putting myself in that position, about if I had to decide to pack in financial planning because there was a passion, I mean, I'm quite passionate about financial planning, but it's a scary thought.
It is scary. And what to say? There are ways to do it. As you know, this work goes a lot deeper, and we might get there in the future. So there are ways, and those ways go beyond just talking and thinking. I agree, for most of us, it's hard to really shift a deep pattern like this that's reinforced back from our society and our peers. For most of us, it's very hard to really transform that just through thinking. We need to go deeper, but there are ways to do that, which we can talk about. The second thing is, definitely when people get big shocks in life, sicknesses or major upheavals, often is, or breakdowns, that often is a time where somehow everything collapses, or the fragility of our lives and this crazy story we all live becomes very clear. Then people do find it easier to move. But I need to say, it definitely is possible, because I work with people who do it. You can change. There's just some work to be done. And the key work is to find out what is the experience that I want, that I believe is tangled up, that I believe money will give me. So it's like, if I think money is power, I'm really saying, I don't feel powerful and I want to feel powerful in my life. If I believe with money comes my freedom and my fun, what I'm really saying is right now, I don't feel free. I don't experience myself as free. That's what I'm looking for. So realize that what we're looking for as humans is this experience or this way of being, or to access these different parts. Those are what actually help us shift, not the number. We can get into more of that. Just to kind of conclude this bit, and then I'll say the other side, and then maybe there's a question about what people can do with this for this week. There's a lovely writer who's a Jungian analyst and has written many, many books, which I think are great actually about Jungian psychology. And he says, in a certain way, he says, in the end, life, you get to choose between depression and anxiety, right? Either you go along with, the conventional mindset, you give in to all the pressure, or you'd be crazy to do this and you have to have this. He's not talking about money, he's talking about all of life. But in the end, you follow just the path that society wants you to follow and the conventional wisdom. And you get to feel kind of comfortable and kind of safe and not too scared. But the price you pay is you have a low level of depression because you're not really in touch with what brings you alive. And most people do that. And if you don't do that, you have to be really honest with yourself. And you have to think, if there's something you really want to do or express or bring or say or create, how do I do that, whatever my circumstances? And then he says, then you don't get the depression, but you get anxiety because it's scary. It doesn't mean you're crippled by anxiety, but it is scary, just as you say, it's scary to say, I'm not going to just live this conventional money pattern. I'm actually going to trust that I can do something different. So that's kind of the choice. I think that's a great quote because it's very honest. What do you think?
I can resonate because I think a lot of people that I meet in my line of work are living in a very low level. I'd call it sort of low energy, anxious about money, which I guess anxious about money is probably the sort of the low level depression potentially. Constantly worried, etc. And I guess the other side is for example, if we go back to our videographer friend, is the unknown, and I'm sure that brings anxiety. But I think that sort of anxiety is probably a higher frequency in terms of energy than the opposite. So when we think of anxiety, we think of it maybe associated with depression, but I think we're looking at anxiety in terms of the unknown, and there's a level of excitement and freedom around that anxiety which is different, a different flavor to the lower energy.
So I think for today, the invitation to people listening, maybe they're curious about where they're going for comfort and security if you're leaving it, but maybe there's a little bit of a deadening of your life energy, or a little bit of a little depression, or where there's something that could be, as you say, very, very exciting and vital, but has a little frisson of fear. It's good just to notice that in your life, and actually notice in your own body, almost you have a dream about something and you get excited, but then you get scared. We work a lot in the body. So for people just to notice that, and there's no judgment, and we don't have to be critical of ourselves, but I think a great deal of modern society does operate on this unconscious kind of, we push down our energy, we go for what we think is safety and comfort, and we think it's tied up with money, but actually psychologically we're just, we want to stay in a cocoon, as one teacher calls it, and we're a little bit afraid of the possibility. And unfortunately, in this society, a lot of that gets tied up with money. So then we think we have a very sensible reason for staying in our cocoon. We say it's a financial reason, or to have a pension, but it's not. It's a human condition.
Should we quickly wrap up with a quick look at just a labeling of the other side, so we don't leave that hanging?
Yes.
And then maybe the action steps that people might be able to take this week.
Great, let's do that. So the other side is, The side we've talked about today is if I think all the good things I want come with money, right, then I'll pursue them and I'll try and hold on to my money. And, you know, I think all the good stuff is in the number, and then it's not, but I'll keep chasing the number, holding on to the number. We looked at that. The other side, which we can explore next time, what if I think all the bad stuff is in money or in the number? Maybe I'm a progressive or a radical or a spiritual person, or I think of myself as being a bit countercultural. And I think, well, you know, I don't think money's power. I think money's the problem, mate. Money's the source of all the injustice in the world. Maybe I'm very religious. I think money's dirty or bad, or I shouldn't touch it, or it's embarrassing, or if I've got lots, it means I'm one of these terrible, oppressive people. That's what we'll look at next week. So the sort of the hint, or the what's it called, like a trailer for next week, is we don't just tie up all the stuff we think is good that we want, but we tie up a whole load of bad or things we think are bad qualities with money. What might I do around money if unconsciously to me money is this sort of nasty, grubby, evil thing? We'll look at that next week.
Been there.
Right. Yeah. It's not unusual. So we'll do that next week. In terms of the takeaway for today, last week I think I said look at counter examples, didn't I? Just look in the world, and when you read the newspapers or celebrity magazines or hear stories about your friends, just notice if the actual experience of with the number comes a happier, richer, better life, or with a small number comes some terrible life. Just notice examples of when that's true and not true. What I would say for today, since we've talked mainly about the pursuit of money, is if anyone's listening to this, reflect on what you think having a bigger number or a big enough number will bring you. So you might say, well, I think I'll be comfortable. I think I'll be free. I think I'll feel successful. I think I don't know, get to create. Whatever you think is the thing you want, the human experience or way of being, tied up with a number, maybe make a list of what you think it will bring you, and then just look at your actual experience now and in your past. So for example, if I think with money comes fun and excitement, right? So I want a big pension so I can have a fun and exciting thing. Then just notice, where is fun and excitement in my life now? And where in my life have I really known fun and excitement? Maybe when I was younger, or maybe specific things I do. And just notice, is your current pattern giving you the thing that you think you're going to get in the future? If it isn't, that's worth noticing. And if there are pockets of fun and excitement, just think, how could I maximize those? And are they only to do with having money? Are there ways to access more fun and excitement now, whether I've got money or not? So that people could do those homeworks, and again, let us know if you're listening to this, and that would be a great inquiry to do. Again, what this and last week's homework are all about are starting to separate my stories and unconscious entanglements with money from my actual lived experience of the things I really want in my life. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Yeah. Enjoyed it, Tim. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks, Shabbar. See you next week.
See you.